I know how this is going to sound. I know you're going to think I'm paranoid or crazy or just some city guy who can't handle small-town life. But I need to tell someone about this. About what happened in Millbrook. About the dinners. My name's Finn, and 3 months ago, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. Inherited my uncle's general store in this little town upstate. Population, maybe 800 people. Seemed perfect. Quiet. Peaceful. Good for starting over after my divorce went south. But there's something wrong with this place. Something wrong with the people. And I think they're coming for me next. So I've been running Uncle Joe's general store for about 6 weeks when Danny approached me. Danny worked at the hardware store across the street. Nice enough guy, maybe mid-30s. Always waved when I was setting up the sidewalk display in mornings. It was a Tuesday, around closing time. I was counting the register when he knocked on the glass door. I could see his breath fogging up in the October air. "Hey, Finn," he said when I let him in. "Hope I'm not keeping you." "Nah, you're good. What's up?" He had this smile, really wide, really genuine. "Well, me and Sharon were wondering if you'd like to come over for dinner this Friday. Meet the kids, you know? We like to welcome newcomers properly." I'll be honest, it sounded nice. I've been eating mostly takeout and frozen dinners since I got to town. And I figure it was good for business, getting to know the locals better. "That sounds great, Danny. Thanks for thinking of me." His smile got even wider. "Oh, we think of everyone eventually. 7 o'clock work for you?" "Perfect." He lingered for a moment, still smiling. "You know, Finn, everyone in Millbrook gets invited sooner or later. It's tradition." Something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. But I just nodded. Small towns have their traditions, right? Friday came around, and I have to admit, I was looking forward to it. I grabbed a bottle of wine from my limited selection and walked the 4 blocks to Danny's house. It was one of those old colonial places, white picket fence, the whole suburban dream thing. Sharon answered the door, and Jesus, that smile, same as Danny's, just too much, too wide, too eager. "Finn, oh, we're so excited you could make it." She practically yanked me inside. "Kids, come meet Mr. Finn." 2 kids came running down the stairs, maybe 8 and 10 years old, and had those same smiles, like someone had told them to turn it up to 11 and leave it there. "Hi, Mr. Finn," they said in unison, which was weird, but kids are weird sometimes. Danny appeared from what I assumed was the kitchen, wiping his hands on an apron. "There he is. Hope you brought an appetite." The house smelled incredible. Roast beef, herbs, something baking. Made my stomach growl. But there was something else underneath it. Something I couldn't quite place. Sweet, but off. We sat down in the living room while Sharon finished up in the kitchen. The kids just stared at me, not talking, just watching, with those smiles. So, the older one, I think Danny called her Emma, finally said, "Do you live alone, Mr. Finn?" Yeah, I do." "That must be nice," said the younger one, Tommy. "Having a big house all to yourself." "It's just a small apartment above the store, actually." They exchanged a look. "Does anyone know where you are tonight?" Emma asked. I laughed, but it came out forced. "Well, you guys know." And I mentioned it to, shit. I realized I hadn't actually told anyone where I was going. Didn't really have anyone to tell. "That's okay," Tommy said, still grinning. "Sometimes it's better when it's just us." Danny seemed oblivious to how strange his kids were being. Just kept making small talk about the weather, asking how the store was doing. Normal stuff. But those kids kept staring, and Sharon kept popping her head in from the kitchen with that same unsettling smile. When we finally sat down to eat, I have to say, the food was amazing. Best meal I'd had since moving to Millbrook. But the conversation, that's when things really started feeling off. "We're so glad you came, Finn," Sharon said, cutting into her roast. "We were starting to worry you might not accept." "Why wouldn't I?" Oh, some people are resistant to tradition, Danny said. But everyone comes around eventually. Everyone gets chosen. There was that word again. Chosen. Chosen for what? They all looked at each other, and for just a second, their smiles faltered. Then Sharon laughed. Too loud, too long. Chosen to be part of the community. Silly. That's what dinner invitations are about. The kids giggled, but it sounded wrong, like they were sharing a joke I wasn't on. Tell me, Finn, Danny said, leaning forward. How are you adjusting to small-town life? Must be quite different from the city. Yeah, it's quiet. Takes some getting used to. Do you miss the anonymity? Emma asked, which was a hell of a question from a 10-year-old. I'm sorry. In the city, no one really knows you, she continued. No one cares if you disappear for a while. Emma, Sharon said sharply, but she was still smiling. It's okay, Mom. Mr. Finn understands. Don't you, Mr. Finn? You understand how easy it would be for someone to just vanish. I set down my fork. That's a pretty dark thing to say, kiddo. Kids say the darndest things, Danny laughed, but his eyes weren't laughing. They were cold, calculating. I tried to change the subject, asked about local events, the town history, anything normal, but they kept steering the conversation back to me. My routine, my habits, whether I had family who might come looking for me, and they were still smiling. All of them, those wide, plastic smiles that never seemed to reach their eyes. After dinner, I excused myself to use the bathroom. Sharon directed me down a hallway toward the back of the house. But as I passed what looked like a basement door, I stopped. There was a heavy padlock on it, brand new by the looks of it, which struck me as odd. Who locks their basement from the outside? But what really got my attention were the scratches around the door frame. Deep gouges in the wood, like someone had been clawing at it from the inside. The scratches were fresh. I could see blonde where the paint had been scraped away. I leaned in closer, and I swear I heard something. Faint, but was that whimpering? Finn! I jumped. Sharon was standing right behind me, still wearing that goddamn smile. Everything all right? You look pale. Yeah, just thought I heard something. Oh, that's just the house settling. These old places make all sorts of noises. She put her hand on my arm, and her grip was stronger than it should have been. Bathroom's just down here. When I came back, they were all waiting in the living room, still smiling, still watching. We hope you'll come again soon, Danny said as I made my excuses about an early morning. Maybe next time you can stay longer. Much longer, Sharon added. The kids giggled. I practically ran home. I couldn't sleep that night. Kept thinking about those scratches, that padlock, the way they'd all been asking such personal questions, and that smell underneath the roast. I finally placed it. It was sweet but sickly, like something rotting. The next week, I tried to act normal. Opened the store, served customers, made small talk, but I kept watching Danny across the street. He waved like always, but now that smile looked different, predatory. Then, on Wednesday, I overheard him talking to Marcus, the guy who runs a gas station. You should come for dinner Friday, Danny was saying. Sharon makes an incredible roast. My blood went cold. Hey, Marcus. I called out before I could stop myself. Got a minute? He jogged over, looking confused. What's up, Finn? Just be careful, okay? About that dinner invitation. What do you mean? I wanted to tell him everything. But how could I? How you explain that a family dinner felt like a trap without sounding insane? Just maybe tell someone where you're going, all right? Marcus laughed. Dude, it's Millbrook. What's the worst that could happen? Famous last words. Marcus didn't show up for work Monday or Tuesday. By Wednesday, I was getting worried, so I walked over to the gas station. There was a closed due to family emergency sign in the window. I asked around town. Nobody seemed concerned. Oh, Marcus had to leave suddenly, the bank teller told me. Family stuff. Did he say when he'd be back? She just smiled. That same smile. I'm sure he'll be back when he's ready. But here's the thing. Marcus had told me just 2 weeks earlier that he didn't have any family left. Parents died in a car crash. No siblings, never married. So what family emergency? I tried calling him. Phone went straight to voicemail. Tried his apartment. Landlord said he'd moved out suddenly. Left no forwarding address. People in small towns gossip about everything. Someone's cat gets stuck in a tree. The whole town knows by lunch. But nobody was talking about Marcus. Nobody seemed to think it was weird that he just vanished overnight. Except when I brought it up, people would get this look. This smile. The same one Danny's family had. I'm sure he's fine, they'd say. People come and go all the time. But that wasn't true. In the 6 weeks I'd been there, I hadn't seen anyone leave town. Hell, I hadn't seen any new faces either, except for mine. I started paying attention after that. Really paying attention. And I noticed things, like how the Hendersons down the street always had their curtains drawn. But sometimes you could see shapes moving behind them. Too many shapes for a family of 3. Or how the butcher shop always seemed to get deliveries at night. Big packages that took 2 men to carry. Or how certain houses had multiple cars in the driveway, but you'd only ever see 1 or 2 people coming and going. I started keeping a notebook, writing down weird things I noticed. Conversations that stopped when I walked by. People who smiled too much. Houses that looked lived in but felt empty. And I realized something that made my stomach drop. I hadn't seen any missing person posters. None. Not one. In a town of 800 people. Over the course of nearly 2 months, I should have seen something. A lost pet. A runaway teenager. Somebody's grandmother with dementia who wandered off. But nothing. It was like people didn't go missing in Millbrook. They just stopped existing. And everyone pretended that was normal. 3 weeks after Marcus disappeared, I was closing up the store when I found an envelope slipped under the door. My name was written on it in careful cursive handwriting. Inside was a dinner invitation. Handwritten, formal, like something from the 1950s. The pleasure of your company is requested for dinner this Saturday evening at 7 p.m. The Henderson family. 412 Maple Street. My hands were shaking as I read it. The Hendersons. The house with too many shadows behind the curtains. I threw the invitation in the trash, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why now? What was the trigger? Was it because I'd been asking questions about Marcus? Saturday came and went. I stayed in my apartment, lights off, curtains drawn. Didn't answer the door when someone knocked around 7:30. They knocked for a long time. Patient, persistent. The next week, people started acting different around me. Colder. The smiles were still there, but they felt forced now. Threatening. Mrs. Chun from the post office stopped making small talk. The teenagers who used to come in for sodas and snacks started shopping elsewhere. Even my supplier, a guy from the next town over, mentioned that maybe it was time to consider relocating. Nothing personal, he said. Just small towns can be tough on outsiders who don't fit in. I was being frozen out, and I had a feeling it was only going to get worse. That's when I started really digging. Used a library computer to research the town history. Missing persons reports from surrounding counties. Anything that might explain what was happening. What I found made everything click into place. Millbrook had the lowest crime rate in the state. 0 missing persons reports in over a decade. But here's what was interesting. The population had stayed exactly the same for the past 15 years. 800 people. On the dot. In most small towns, you see fluctuation. People move away for college, for jobs, for family. Young people leave. Old people die. New families move in. It's natural. But Millbrook's population never changed. 800 people, year after year after year. I cross-referenced with county records, death certificates, birth certificates. The numbers didn't add up. There should have been more deaths, more people moving away. Instead, It was like the town existed in stasis. Then I found something that made my blood freeze. A newspaper article from 2019. A hiker had gone missing in the woods outside Millbrook. Search and rescue found his campsite, but no trace of him. The article mentioned that local residents had been extremely helpful with the search, offering home-cooked meals and places to stay for the volunteers. There was a photo, a group of Millbrook residents standing with the search team, and right there in front row, smiling that same plastic smile, was Danny. The article was dated 6 months before I'd found any record of Danny living in Millbrook. I started looking at my neighbors differently after that, really looking at them. Danny and Sharon had 2 kids, but sometimes I'd see them play in the yard with 3 children, sometimes 4. The extras looked familiar, like kids I might have seen in old photos at the library, or faces that nagged at the edge of my memory. The Hendersons' house had a 2-car garage, but I counted at least 6 different vehicles coming and going over the past month. And that butcher shop, I finally worked up the courage to go in and look around. The meat was good quality, sure, but they had cuts I couldn't identify, shapes that didn't quite look like beef or pork or chicken. The butcher, a friendly guy named Pete, noticed me staring. "Try something new," he asked, pointing to a tray of what looked like steaks. "What kind of meat is that?" His smile widened. "Local, very local. We only serve it to special customers." I bought some ground beef and got out of there, but his word stayed with me. Local meat for special customers. And I realized I was being fattened up. All those dinner invitations, all that friendliness, they weren't trying to welcome me to the community. They were checking if I was ready. Last week, a new guy came to town. Jake, I think his name was. Mid-20s, driving a beat-up Honda with out-of-state plates. Said he was just passing through, but his car broke down at Henderson's garage. I watched him from the store window as he talked to Bill Henderson. Saw Bill's face light up with that familiar smile. Saw him pointing toward the bed and breakfast on Main Street. That evening, I saw Jake walking around town, getting the tour. People were so friendly to him, so welcoming, just like they'd been to me. And I realized they'd found my replacement. The dinner invitations would stop coming for me now. I was no longer the new guy, the outsider they needed to integrate. I was just another missing person nobody would look for. Jake would get the royal treatment for a few weeks, maybe a month if he was lucky. They'd learn his habits, his routine, who might come looking for him. And when they were sure he could disappear, without raising questions, well, I had a feeling the butcher shop would be getting another delivery soon. This morning, I found another envelope under my door. Same handwriting as before, but different paper. Expensive stuff. The kind you use for special occasions. The pleasure of your company is requested for a farewell dinner this Friday evening at 7 p.m. The community center. Formal attire requested. A farewell dinner. They weren't even pretending anymore. I've been packing all day, taking only what I can carry. Nothing that would make it obvious I'm leaving. I'll slip out tonight, drive until I hit a city big enough to disappear in. But here's what scares me. I don't think I'm going to make it. They're watching me. I can feel it. Every time I look out the window, there's someone there. Danny across the street, pretending to sweep his sidewalk. Mrs. Chun walking her dog past my building for the 5th time today. Kids play in the park, but their ball somehow always bounces toward my door. They know I know, and they're not going to let me leave. I tried calling the state police, but my phone's dead. Landline too. Internet's been down for maintenance since yesterday. My car won't start. Just clicks when I turn the key. I'm sure if I looked under the hood, I'd find something important missing or broken. They're herding me toward Friday night, making sure I have no choice but to show up. It's Thursday night now, and I haven't left the apartment all day. Been surviving on crackers and tap water. Too scared to go down to the store for food. But they're getting impatient. Someone's been knocking on my door every few hours. Not aggressive, just persistent. They knock, wait, knock again. Sometimes they call my name. Always friendly, always smiling. I can hear in their voices. Finn, we know you're in there. Just want to make sure you're okay. The whole town's excited about tomorrow night, Finn. It's going to be special. Don't make this harder than it has to be. That last one was Danny, and for the first time, the friendliness slipped. Just for a second. I've been watching from my window, trying to figure out how many of them there are, how organized this is, and I think it's everyone. The whole town, 800 people, all in on it, all smiling, all waiting for tomorrow night. I saw Jake earlier, walking down Main Street with a group of locals. They were showing him around, pointing out the sights. He was laughing, relaxed, totally oblivious. Poor bastard doesn't know he's next. I waited until 3 a.m., then snuck down the back stairs. Thought maybe I could make it to the highway on foot, flag down a truck or something. But they were ready for me. The streets weren't empty. In a normal town, at 3 a.m. on a Thursday, you wouldn't see a soul. But Millbrook isn't normal. There were people everywhere, standing in shadows, sitting on porches, walking dogs that didn't need walking, all of them watching, all of them smiling. I made it maybe 2 blocks before I realized I wasn't an escape. Not tonight, maybe not ever. So I came back, climbed the stairs, locked my door, and started recording this. Because if something happens to me tomorrow night, I want there to be a record. I want someone to know what happened in Millbrook, what's still happening. It's Friday evening now. Almost 6 o'clock. I can hear them gathering outside. Cars pulling up, voices in the street. The whole town coming together for the farewell dinner. My farewell dinner. I've been thinking about Marcus all day. About that hiker from 2019. About how many others there might have been. People who came to Millbrook looking for a fresh start, a quiet life, a place to disappear. Well, they got their wish. They disappeared. And now it's my turn. Someone's coming up the stairs. Slow, heavy footsteps. They're not trying to be quiet anymore. A knock at my door. 3 slow, deliberate raps. Finn! It's Danny's voice. Still friendly. Still smiling. Time to go. I'm not going to answer. I'm going to sit here in my locked apartment and wait. Maybe they'll give up. Maybe they'll decide it's too risky. Too much trouble. But I don't think they will. The knocking's getting louder, more insistent, and I can hear other voices now. Sharon, the kids, Mrs. Chun, Bill Henderson, all of them. Finn, don't make this difficult. Everyone has to play their part. The doorknob's rattling. They're trying to get in. I should probably stop recording now. Hide this somewhere they won't find it. Maybe someone will come looking for me eventually. Maybe they'll find this and understand. Or maybe they'll just become the next person standing at someone else's door, smiling and asking them to dinner. The knocking stopped. That's somehow worse than when it was loud. Now I can't tell where they are, what they're doing. Wait, I hear something. Scratching, like claws on wood. They're not trying to break down the door. They're already inside. There you are, Finn. We've been looking everywhere for you. Look, I'm not the kind of guy who believes in ghosts or any of that supernatural crap. I'm Gerald. I'm 32. I work in an accounting firm downtown, and I live in one of those small towns where nothing interesting ever happens. At least, that's what I used to think. There's this one thing that's been eating at me for months now, and I can't shake it. I keep thinking maybe I'm losing my mind, you know? But the more I try to rationalize what happened, the more disturbing it gets. So I'm just going to tell you exactly what I experienced, and maybe you can help me make sense of it. It started with Charlie's Quick Stop. If you've ever lived in a small town, you know the type of place I'm talking about. One of those fluorescent-lit convenience stores that stays open way too late, selling overpriced energy drinks and stale sandwiches to night shift workers and insomniacs like me. See, I've always been a night owl. After work, I'd drive around for a while, just clear my head, and I'd usually end up at Charlie's around 9:30 or 10 p.m. It became this weird routine of mine. I'd grab a bag of chips, maybe a Coke, chat with the night cashier for a few minutes. Nothing exciting, just normal. The cashier was this older guy, probably in his 60s, with thinning gray hair and these thick glasses that made his eyes look huge. He always wore the same faded blue polo shirt with Charlie's embroidered on the chest. Never learned his name, but he was friendly enough. Had this habit of humming old country songs under his breath while he restocked the cigarette display. The store itself was exactly what you'd expect. 3 narrow aisles packed with junk food, a wall of refrigerated drinks in back, and that distinctive smell of industrial cleaning supplies mixed with coffee that had been sitting too long. The fluorescent lights buzzed constantly, casting everything in that harsh white glow that makes everyone look slightly sick. But here's the thing. Charlie's was reliable. They were open until midnight every single night, 7 days a week. Had been for years, according to the faded, open 6 a.m. to 12 a.m. sign taped to the glass door. In a town where everything else rolled up the sidewalks at 8 p.m., Charlie's was like this little beacon of civilization. So imagine my confusion when I pulled into the parking lot one Tuesday night in late October, and the place was completely dark. I mean, not just dim lighting. The whole store was pitch black. The neon open sign was off. The fluorescent lights inside were dead, and the front door had one of those metal security gates pulled down over it. My first thought was maybe they had a power outage or something, but the street lights were working fine, and I could see lights on in the apartments across the street. I checked my phone. 9:15 p.m. They should have been open for almost 3 more hours. I was about to drive away when something made me look more carefully through the front window. The security gate only covered the door. The big plate glass windows were still exposed. And that's when I saw him. The cashier was inside, just standing behind the counter, perfectly still, staring straight ahead, not moving, not restocking, not cleaning, just standing there in the darkness. At first, I thought maybe he was dealing with some kind of emergency, or maybe the register was broken and he was waiting for someone to come fix it. But something about the way he stood there felt wrong. Too still, too rigid, like a mannequin. I knocked on the glass, not loud, just a gentle tap, tap, tap. He didn't react, didn't even blink, just kept staring straight ahead with those magnified eyes behind his thick glasses. I went back the next night, telling myself it was probably nothing. Maybe the guy had been sick, or maybe there had been some kind of family emergency. These things happen, right? But when I pulled up at 9:20 p.m., the exact same thing happened. Store completely dark, security gate down. And there he was again, standing behind the counter like a statue. This time, I tried calling out, "Hey! Hey, you okay in there?" Nothing. He just stood there, staring at something I couldn't see. But here's what really got under my skin. As I was watching him, I started noticing other shapes in the store. Dark silhouettes standing in the aisles. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. You know how shadows can look like people in dim lighting. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became. There were definitely people inside. Maybe 4 or 5 of them, scattered throughout the store. And just like the cashier, they were perfectly motionless, all facing the same direction, toward the front of the store, like they were waiting for something. I pressed my face against the glass, trying to get a better look. And that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One of the figures in aisle 2 was wearing a bright yellow construction vest. Even in the darkness, that reflective material was unmistakable. I knew that vest. It belonged to Roy Hendricks, this guy who worked road construction in town. I'd seen him at Charlie's plenty of times, usually around 11 p.m. when he got off his shift. Nice enough guy. Always bought the same thing, black coffee and a pack of Marlboros. But what was Roy doing standing motionless in a clothes store? The next morning, I couldn't concentrate at work. I kept thinking about those figures in the store, about the cashier's blank stare, about Roy's yellow vest glowing in the darkness. Finally, around lunchtime, I decided to drive by Charlie's to see what was going on during normal hours. The parking lot was empty. Not just empty, completely abandoned, weeds growing through cracks in the asphalt, trash blowing around, the kind of desolation you see at places that have been closed for months. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the building. The open 6 a.m. to 12 a.m. sign was still there, but looked faded and weathered, like it had been baking in the sun for years. The windows were covered with a film of dust and grime. That afternoon, I stopped by the town hall and asked Mrs. Patterson, who works in the record department, about Charlie's Quick Stop. She's one of those people who knows everything about everybody in town. Charlie's, she said, looking confused. Honey, that place hasn't been open in, must be going on 4 years now. Old Charlie Brennan used to run it, but he died back in 21, and nobody wanted to take over the lease. But what about the night cashier? I asked. Older guy, gray hair, thick glasses? Mrs. Patterson's expression changed. She got very quiet, very serious. Gerald, are you talking about Frank Morrison? I shrugged. I don't know his name. He worked nights, always wore a blue polo shirt. Frank Morrison worked the night shift at Charlie's for almost 15 years, she said slowly. But Gerald, Frank died 3 years ago. Someone broke into the store around midnight, shot him during a robbery. They never caught who did it. I drove home in a daze, trying to process what Mrs. Patterson had told me. But that night, against every instinct screaming at me to stay away, I found myself parking outside Charlie's again at 9:30 p.m. The store was dark, just like the previous nights. But this time, I was looking for something specific. I walked around to the side of the building, where there was a small memorial that I'd never noticed before. Plastic flowers, now faded and weathered, and a small plaque that read, "In memory of Frank Morrison, 1958 to 2022. A good man taken too soon." Below that, someone had taped a grainy newspaper clipping. Even in the dim streetlight, I could make out the headline, "Local store clerk killed in late-night robbery." And there, in a small black and white photo, was a face I'd been seeing every night for months. The same thick glasses, the same thinning gray hair. Frank Morrison, the man who'd been dead for 3 years. I looked up at the store windows, and there he was again, standing behind the counter in the darkness, just like always. But now I could see him more clearly, and what I saw made my hands shake. His blue polo shirt was torn and stained with something dark. Those thick glasses sat crooked on his face, one lens cracked. And his eyes weren't just staring straight ahead. They were staring directly at me. I should have left. Should have gotten in my car and never looked back. But something compelled me to stay, to understand what I was seeing. I pressed my face against the glass again, and that's when I realized the other figures in the store were clearer now too. Roy Hendricks in his yellow construction vest, but now I could see the dark stains across his chest. A woman in a nurse's uniform. Her white shoes splattered with something that looked black in the dim light. An elderly man in a cardigan, slumped against a magazine rack like he was sleeping, except his head was tilted at an impossible angle. And they were all staring at me now. Every single one of them had turned to face the window where I stood. That's when I understood. These weren't just random people I'd seen around town. These were all people who had died at Charlie's. The robbery hadn't been a one-time thing. It had happened multiple times over the years. Frank Morrison was just the last victim, the one who'd made the papers. I pulled out my phone and started backing away from the window, but I couldn't stop staring. Frank Morrison raised one pale hand and pressed it against the glass from the inside. His mouth moved, like he was trying to say something, but no sound came through the thick window. Then the fluorescent lights inside flickered on. The sudden brightness was blinding after staring into the darkness for so long. I had to shield my eyes, and when I lowered my hand, I saw something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. The store looked exactly like it had months ago when I used to shop there. Clean aisles, fully stocked shelves, fresh coffee brewing behind the counter. Frank Morrison stood in his usual spot, looking exactly like he had when he was alive. No torn shirt, no crooked glasses, just a tired night shift worker waiting for customers. But the others were gone. The construction worker, the nurse, the old man, all vanished like they'd never been there at all. Frank smiled at me through the glass and pointed to the door. The security gate was gone. The open sign flickered to life, casting red neon light across the parking lot. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran to my car like a terrified child and drove home with my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. But here's the thing that really gets to me. The next morning, I drove by again and the store was back to its abandoned state. Weeds in the parking lot, dust on the windows, that memorial plaque still hanging on the sidewall. I asked around town, very carefully, about the other people I'd seen in the store that night. Roy Hendricks died in a car accident 2 years ago, coming home from his night shift. The nurse, Sarah Chun, had a heart attack in the hospital parking garage last year. The elderly man, Walter Price, died in his sleep 6 months ago. But here's what nobody talks about, what I had to piece together from old newspaper archives and death certificates. They all died between midnight and 6 a.m. They were all night owls, just like me. And according to their credit card records, they'd all been regular customers at Charlie's Quick Stop. I haven't been back to Charlie's since that night 3 weeks ago. I've changed my route home, started shopping at the 24-hour grocery store 2 towns, over when I need something late at night. I tell myself it was all some kind of hallucination, some weird psychological break brought on by stress and too much caffeine. But last night, I was driving home from dinner with my sister, and we had to pass by Charlie's to get to her house. It was just after 11 p.m. As we drove past, I glanced over at the store just out of habit. The lights were on. The parking lot was full of cars I recognized. Roy's pickup truck, Sarah's Honda Civic, Walter's old Buick. And standing behind the counter, Frank Morrison waved at me through the window. My sister didn't see anything. According to her, we drove past an empty, abandoned building, just like always. But I know what I saw, and I think Frank Morrison is still working the night shift at Charlie's, still serving customers who need somewhere to go between midnight and dawn, still waiting behind that counter with his friendly smile and his thick glasses, ready to ring up whatever they need. The only difference is his customers don't ever leave. And the worst part? Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I find myself wanting to visit Charlie's again, just to see Frank one more time, just to buy a bag of chips and chat about the weather. It would be so easy to pull into that familiar parking lot, to walk through those glass doors, to become a regular customer again. But I know that if I do, if I walk into Charlie's Quick Stop at midnight, I'll never walk out again. I'll become another silent figure standing in the aisles, waiting for the next late-night customer to discover what happens when the store that never closes finally finds a customer it's been waiting for. So if you're ever driving through a small town late at night, and you see a convenience store that looks a little too bright, a little too welcoming, maybe keep driving. Some places are meant to stay closed, and some cashiers are meant to rest. You know that feeling when you realize something you've been doing for months, something completely normal and routine, never actually happened? Yeah, me neither, until 3 weeks ago. I'm Frederick, and I need to tell someone about this because, honestly, I don't know what's real anymore. And after what my sister told me yesterday, I'm starting to think maybe I never did. So, a little background. I'm 28, work at a mid-level accounting firm downtown. Nothing exciting, just spreadsheets and tax forms, you know? The kind of job where you spend 8 hours staring at numbers until they start bleeding together. By the time I get out, it's usually around 9 p.m., and most nights I'm pretty wired. Too much coffee, too much screen time. Sleep doesn't come easy. That's how I started taking these late night walks. My apartment's on the east side of town, and there's this route I take that goes past the old residential area, through some woods, and over this small wooden bridge that crosses Miller's Creek. The whole thing's maybe a 40-minute loop, perfect for clearing my head and burning off that restless energy. The bridge was my favorite part. It's old, probably built in the 70s, with weathered wooden planks and these thick metal railings that have this satisfying weight when you lean against them. During the day, you probably see joggers or dog walkers, but at night, dead quiet. Just the sound of water flowing underneath, and maybe some crickets if it's warm enough. I've been doing this walk for about 4 months. Same route, same time, almost every weeknight. It became this ritual, you know? Work, walk, home, sleep. Simple, predictable, safe. It was a Tuesday in October when I first noticed him. The man at the far end of the bridge. I was maybe halfway across when I looked up and saw this figure just standing there. At first, I thought maybe it was another late-night walker taking a break, admiring the view or something. But as I got closer, I realized he wasn't moving at all, just standing perfectly still, facing my direction. Now, this should have been weird, right? But here's the thing. You don't immediately jump to creepy when you see someone at night. Your brain makes excuses. Maybe he's on a phone call. Maybe he's having a moment. Maybe he's waiting for someone. So I did what any normal person would do. I slowed down a bit, gave him some space, and when I got close enough to pass by, I nodded and said, "Evening." Nothing. Not even a glance. He was maybe in his 40s, average height, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His hands were at his sides, and he was just staring. Not at me, exactly, but past me, like he was looking at something behind me on the bridge. I turned to look over my shoulder. Nothing there, obviously. When I turned back, he was gone. I stood there for a minute, looking around. The bridge isn't that long, maybe 50 feet total. There's nowhere to hide, and I would have heard footsteps on the wooden planks if he'd walked away. But he was just not there anymore. I shrugged it off, told myself I was tired, that maybe I'd imagine how still he'd been standing. People move when you're not looking directly at them, right? He probably just walked off while I was checking behind me. But then it happened again the next night. Same spot, same position. Different clothes this time. A light-colored shirt instead of the dark jacket. But the same unsettling stillness. Same blank stare in my direction. This time I didn't approach. I stopped about 20 feet away and just watched him for a few minutes. He didn't move, didn't shift his weight, didn't look around, didn't even seem to be breathing, just standing there like a statue. I called out, "Hey, you okay?" Nothing. Sir, still nothing. I waited maybe 5 minutes, and then I turned around and went home. When I looked back from the other end of the bridge, he was gone again. By the third night, I was expecting him, and there he was. Different clothes again, this time a hoodie and what looked like khakis. Same position, same stare. I started timing it. I'd approach the bridge, see him there, turn around and check my phone. Every single time, when I looked back after exactly 2 minutes, he was gone, not walking away, not hiding, just gone. This went on for 2 weeks. Every night, same routine. I started taking pictures, but they always came out blurry or too dark to make out details. I tried different approaches, coming from the other direction, arriving at different times, even hiding in the trees to watch the bridge before walking across. Nothing changed the pattern. The really weird part, I started looking forward to it. I know that sounds sick, but there was something almost comforting about the predictability. Work sucked, my apartment was lonely, but every night I had this encounter, this mystery to puzzle over. Everything changed when I mentioned it to David at work. We were having lunch, and I was telling him about my walking routine, trying to work up to the weird part, when he interrupted me. "Wait, you said you walk over the bridge by Miller's Creek." "Yeah, every night. There's actually this strange." "Frederick, His voice got really serious. What bridge? I laughed. What do you mean, what bridge? The wooden one goes over the creek. You know, past the Riverside neighborhood. David was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Dude, that bridge was torn down like 3 years ago. There was some accident, structural problems. They fenced off the whole area. The blood drained from my face. No, I was just there last night. I walk across it every. Frederick, I'm serious. My cousin lives on Maple Street, right by where that bridge used to be. It's been gone for years. I pulled out my phone, started scrolling through my photos. Look, I have pictures, but when I opened my camera roll, the photos weren't there, or rather, they were there, but they were just black squares, every single one, like I'd been taking pictures of nothing. Show me, I said, after work. Come with me and I'll show you the bridge. David looked uncomfortable, but he agreed. We left the office together around 9:30. I was confident, maybe even a little smug. I was going to prove David wrong. Show him this bridge I'd been walking across for months. But as we got closer to the area, something fell off. The street lights seemed dimmer. The familiar landmarks looked different somehow. When we reached what should have been the path to the bridge, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was a chain-link fence stretched across the path. Old, rusted, with a sign that read "Danger, Bridge Out," and "No Trespassing." Behind the fence, the path just ended, dropped off into empty space above the creek, maybe 20 feet down to the water. This isn't right, I whispered. This isn't where the bridge was right here. David put his hand on my shoulder. Frederick, man, are you okay? You've been walking here every night. I stared at that fence, at that drop, try and make sense of it. The path looked familiar. The trees, the bend in the creek. Everything was exactly where it should be, except there was no bridge. Had never been a bridge, according to those weathered signs. Where have I been walking? I asked more to myself than to David. We stood there for maybe 10 minutes. David asking if I needed to see a doctor, me just staring at that empty space where I swore a bridge had been. Finally, he offered to drive me home. I stopped taking walks after that. How could I? Every time I thought about going out, I pictured that fence, that drop into the creek. I started having trouble sleeping again, but I couldn't bring myself to leave the apartment after dark. For 2 weeks, I managed to convince myself it was some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Work had been busy. I'd been drinking too much coffee, not getting enough sleep. The mind plays tricks, right? Maybe I'd been sleepwalking, or maybe I'd found some other route and just misremembered where it was. I almost had myself convinced. Almost. Then my sister called. Frederick, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Emma sounded scared. My sister doesn't scare easily. She's a nurse, deals with emergencies every day, keeps her cool when everyone else is falling apart. What's wrong? I asked, have you been going out at night? Like walking around town. My stomach dropped. Why do you ask? Because I found your shoes. Your walking shoes, the gray New Balance ones with the blue laces. I found them yesterday morning. Found them where? By Miller's Creek. They were sitting right at the edge of the water, perfectly placed side by side, like someone had just taken them off and left them there. I looked down at my feet. I was wearing those exact shoes. That's impossible, I said. I'm wearing them right now. Silence on the other end of the line. Emma? Frederick, I'm holding them. I'm looking at them right now. They're wet, like they've been sitting in the dew all night. There's mud caked on the soles. I pulled one of my shoes off, examined the sole. Clean, completely clean. This doesn't make sense, I whispered. There's something else. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper now. I was driving home from work yesterday, around 9:30, and I saw someone walking near the creek. I thought it looked like you, so I slowed down to get a better look. And, Frederick, I watched this person walk right up to the edge where the old bridge used to be. They just kept walking, like they were walking across something that wasn't there. I got out of the car to call out to them. But when I looked again, what? There was no one there. But I swear I could hear footsteps on wood. For like 30 seconds, just the sound of someone walking across a wooden bridge. But there was nothing there, Frederick. Nothing but empty air above the water. I hung up and immediately drove to Miller's Creek. It was almost 10 p.m. by the time I got there, my old walking time. The fence was still there, the warning sign still in place. But at the base of the fence, exactly where Emma said she'd found them, there was a dark patch in the dirt, the perfect outline of 2 shoes. I stood there for an hour, staring at that empty space above the creek, listening. Once, I thought I heard it, the soft sound of footsteps on wooden planks. But when I looked up, there was nothing but darkness. That was 3 days ago. Since then, Emma's called me twice to say she's seen someone who looks like me walking in that area. Both times around 9:30 p.m. Both times, when she gets out to look closer, there's no one there. But I've been home both nights. I swear I've been home. The thing is, I've been having these dreams. Every night since Emma called. Dreams where I'm walking across that bridge again, and the man is there, waiting at the far end. Only now I can see his face clearly. It's my face. And in the dream, when I reach the other end of the bridge, I turn around and look back, and there's another me standing where I started, and another one approaching from behind him. An endless line of Fredericks, all walking across a bridge that doesn't exist, all heading toward. What? I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if something else is going on. But every night around 9:30, I get this urge to go outside, to walk to Miller's Creek, to step over that fence and just keep walking. And the scariest part? I'm not sure I'm going to be able to stop myself much longer. So if anyone knows me, if anyone sees me out at night heading toward Miller's Creek, please don't follow me. And whatever you do, don't try to walk across the bridge. Because I'm starting to think that once you see it, once you cross it, you never really stop crossing it. You never really come back. I recorded this 3 hours ago. It's 9:15 p.m. now, and I can feel it starting again. That pull toward the creek, toward something that shouldn't be there, but is. My walking shoes are by the door, and I keep looking at them. If you're listening to this, it means I uploaded it to a cloud drive with a scheduled release, which probably means I couldn't resist the pull. If Emma finds another pair of my shoes by the creek, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I tried to stay home. And if you ever find yourself walking alone at night, and you see a bridge that maybe shouldn't be there, with someone standing at the far end waiting, just turn around.